So, Russia's Vladimir Putin and America's Donald Trump are seemingly on a new path of nuclear tension, as the US president repositions submarines closer to Russia. And no, it's not because of some satellite intelligence or major missile alert. It's because of the one and only Dmitry Medvedev, that former Russian president and current professional provocateur or serial tweeter who made some vaguely threatening remarks online. Indeed, this might well be the first time a social media spat has flirted with nuclear brinkmanship and actually changed policy. But what makes this, of course, more dangerous is that it's happening against the real backdrop of a war grinding on in Ukraine. Peace talks between the sides that have completely disintegrated, and these two leaders, Trump and Putin, with emotional immaturity and ego-based approach to decision-making, who seem to think that unpredictability is a virtue. So in this video, I wanted to unpack what's actually going on here, why Trump's threats are actually more than potentially his own theatre, why Putin is stalling and surprisingly quiet, and why the longer this drags on, there is a real risk of miscalculation.
This is The Global Gambit.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the channel. Now, if you're new here, I try to cut through the chaos and get to the core of what's actually going on in global affairs and, well, do that in bite-sized chunks and understand the variances, particularly in the case of Russia and Ukraine. In this case, about how an online exchange has seemingly spiraled into nuclear symbolism. And in the background, well, Russian missiles still hit various targets across Ukraine and Kiev. 31 civilians killed in one of the deadliest attacks this year so far, just after the peace talks have attempted to be resumed yet again. So as Trump fumes and Medvedev mocks, we're all left wondering, is this all just theatre at this point? Or are we sleepwalking into something much worse for once? And as we try to unpack this seemingly terrifying development, what do you think? Is this just more bluffs? I mean, it is Medvedev we're talking about if you're a regular to the channel, but still, the potential repositioning of nuclear subs does seem like an active, tangible policy shift. Let me know. To understand how we got here, let's remind ourselves of the details. Since returning to office, Trump has been pushing hard to be seen as the peacemaker, especially after his self-imposed and realistic 24 hours to negotiate a ceasefire didn't actually materialize. Now, he has indeed vacillated between being frustrated with Zelensky and Ukraine to being frustrated with Putin and Russia and various others in between, such as NATO and Europe. However, it is Putin and the Kremlin that has been Trump's most consistent and recent source of frustration, with him visibly getting angry at Putin's continual striking of Ukraine while suggesting that peace talks are possible. So, as the White House became increasingly frustrated with the seeming lack of genuine intent by the Kremlin to engage in the peace talks, let alone a ceasefire, Trump suggested you have 50 days, Putin, to do something about it. And then just last week, while meeting the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he said, you've got 10 to 12 days to halt the fighting or face sweeping sanctions, tariffs, and restrictions on countries buying Russian oil. Indeed, secondary tariffs of 100% on countries that engage with Russian oil, which means China and India as well. Now, former President of Russia Medvedev, true to form, took to social media and declared that every US ultimatum was, quote unquote, a step towards war. Trump didn't like it, and he responded at midnight saying, quote, tell Medvedev to be careful what he says. He is entering very dangerous territory. And with that, the President of the United States claimed he had repositioned 2 nuclear submarines to, quote, appropriate regions. Just in case, as he put it, the foolish and inflammatory statements were more than just empty talk. Not something you really want to read before going to bed. Not to be deterred, Medvedev fired back on Telegram, referencing the infamous dead hand system, a Cold War relic that automatically launches nuclear missiles if Russian leadership is largely wiped out. It's a system designed for doomsday, basically, and invoking it was, in effect, a veiled threat. And he ended it with a very appropriate and sensitive laughing emoji. So let that sink in for a second. A former head of state references a global thermonuclear war with an emoji. Maybe he should have been more thorough and just used a meme. But Trump, subsequently speaking to Newsmax, said, when you mention the word nuclear, my eyes light up. Again, not especially comforting. But here is the thing. It isn't about just Medvedev, because in going after him, Trump has effectively dragged the entire question of nuclear deterrence into the middle of an unresolved war and blurred the lines between political posturing and strategic signaling. We're largely used to this with the Russians, or specifically Putin, as he's done quite a few times, and in videos I've covered on the channel you can find as well. Now, from the Russian perspective, what was the official perspective of Moscow? Silence. The Kremlin didn't comment. The Ministry of Defense didn't respond. Not a peep from the Foreign Ministry. Instead, Russian press largely brushed it off. Military commentators told Kommersant it was, quote, a temper tantrum. A retired lieutenant general dismissed it as blather. And others have claimed Trump likely never gave an actual military order, which might be true. But that isn't the point, because predictability is the point here. And when you're talking about at the highest echelons of decision-making in government amongst the two biggest nuclear powers by stockpile capacity, it does matter. That's how Trump negotiates, though, it seems to be. Throw the world off balance, lead with noise, then step in with a deal. He did it with Kim Jong-un, and many could argue he's trying to do the same with Putin, using chaos as a lever and leverage for future talks. The difference being here that these aren't economic sanctions, they're nuclear weapons, and the fallout for them is, well, just that, actual fallout. But here's where things get even more revealing. Amid all this posturing, Putin finally spoke, but he didn't address the submarines. No, he didn't directly respond to Trump's deadline either, at least not directly. He was standing beside his favorite puppet, Belarusian strongman Alexander Lukashenko, at a monastery no less, and he sent a very different kind of message, a much colder one. He claimed Russia still hopes for peace talks, but added that the momentum of the war is now in, quote, our favour. He said specifically, disappointments come from inflated expectations. That's a well-known rule, which, well, in translation means don't expect Russia to give in. Largely the same rhetoric, and one that we've always seen coming out of Russian foreign policy whenever they feel genuinely threatened. He also said peace must come through, quote, quiet negotiations, not public ultimatums. But while saying that, Russian missiles were still slamming into Kiev. Drone swarms have been hitting civilian areas at unprecedented rates, and the Ministry of Defense even claimed it had captured a Chisiar after a 16-month battle, though Ukraine denies full control was ever lost. This isn't a country, therefore, seeking peace in the eyes of many. It's a country using peace talk optics whilst pushing harder on the front lines. And it's this tactic Putin has been doing for a good half a year at this point, trying to draw out as much belief and make the White House falsely sense that they are actually getting somewhere, whilst pounding more of Ukraine into the ground and trying to retake places like Pokrovsk and other cities. So what's really going on? Well, from Trump's side, this looks like pressure. Push Putin with a deadline, threaten those sanctions, flex the nuclear capabilities, even if it's just rhetorical. From Putin's side, it's more of the same. Stall, offer vague hopes of some peace, blame NATO, invoke European insecurity, try to divide and conquer between Western alliances, but never actually stop on the ground. And Zelensky knows this. Zelensky put it bluntly saying, we all understand who makes decisions in Russia. What's needed is Russia's readiness. But that readiness isn't there, because what Moscow wants isn't peace, it's recognition of its gains, of its leverage, and its ability to control the pace of the war, the narrative, the framing. Putin is a strong man, and he has to ensure that he appeals to his voter base. Otherwise, not just his voter base, but his overall power base as well. Because if he doesn't, then, well, there may well be some internal dynamics that are a bigger problem for him than suddenly Trump's nuclear war talk. And here's the real danger with that. This isn't a Cuban Missile Crisis or something like that yet, but it is something largely darker. A slow, seeming incremental breakdown of the norms that have kept nuclear weapons largely out of politics, at least until this stage. Because once you start using submarine deployments to win arguments online, the taboo weakens. Once you elevate Telegram posts into casus belli, restraint becomes optional. And once unpredictability becomes the main predominant strategy, miscalculation is inevitable. That's where we seem to be now. Not at war, not at peace, but in this unstable, grey fog of war between where symbols and signals can be misread and no one's quite sure who's bluffing anymore. But what do you think about this and what happens next? Trump's August 8 deadline is looming, and if Russia doesn't move, and it almost certainly won't, those new sanctions will hit. Very hard ones, targeting not just Moscow, but those who keep it alive at a very high rate at this point, China, India, and beyond. And if Trump decides to escalate further, well, that's where things get messy. Because while Putin prays in monasteries and Trump fumes on social media, civilians continue to die in the middle of all of this. The battlefield expands, the rhetoric intensifies, and guardrails that once kept nuclear powers from even talking this way are slowly eroding. And the normalization, as we cover a lot on this channel, of nuclear weapons, but also just the international disorder, are completely evaporating into something we've never seen before. But if you made it this far, I do want to hear from you. Is it performative bluffing, or are we witnessing the slow breakdown of nuclear restraint in real time? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this breakdown useful, then do subscribe. No shouting, no hysteria. I just like to cut through it and talk to you directly about this. My name is Pyotr. I'm a half English, half Russian guy, having been brought up predominantly in the West, but lived in Ukraine and Russia. I've spent years covering this region and working in areas like the UN, the World Bank, and International Crisis Group. And on this channel, I try to bring you an insider sense with conversations from journalists, diplomats, analysts, and more, so we can actually understand what's going on and, well, hopefully navigate it all for the better. See you all in the next one. Take care.